Well, I want to thank those that have joined our presentation thus far. We will be starting shortly, but in the meantime, please familiarize yourself with Zoom, the platform, and you can participate in our icebreaker in the chat box. So during this time, please put in your full name, affiliation. Is this your first time to the California Ocean Litter Strategy webinar? Yes and no. And tell us one way you love reducing your waste around the holiday season. So please add your interest in the chat and we will begin in a minute or so. All right, I'm seeing some answers coming in and I see we still have a few people in the waiting room. So Caitlin, we might need to automatically add those folks, but I think great time to begin. So with that, ready to get this started. So good afternoon and welcome to the biannual California Ocean Litter Prevention Strategy webinar. The Ocean Litter Strategy Prevention Strategy was jointly developed by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Marine Debris Program and the California Ocean Protection Council back in 2018. The Ocean Litter Strategy, or OLS as we sometimes refer to it, outlines actions to prevent and reduce ocean litter in California. I look forward to today's webinar to highlight the OLS and hear from our wonderful ocean litter community. So starting us off for introductions, my name is Christy Kehoe and I have supported the NOAA Marine Debris Program for over the past 6 years and just made it to over my 1 year anniversary with my role as California Regional Coordinator. I am based in Oakland, California, but help support our projects across the state as well as binationally with Mexico. I work on initiatives across prevention, removal research, monitoring, and coordination of the ocean litter strategy. I truly love the work that I do and being able to connect with all of our amazing diverse stakeholders. With that, I'll kick it off to my other partner, Caitlin.
And good afternoon, Caitlin Kalua, Water Quality Program Manager with the California Ocean Protection Council and co-facilitator along with Christy. I've also recently hit my 1 year mark in this role where I serve as staff lead for OPC on plastics and marine debris related programs, policies, and research, and just grateful for everyone joining today.
Thanks, Caitlin. So with that, on behalf of the NOAA Marine Debris Program and Ocean Protection Council, we just really want to thank you for taking the time to join today's webinar. We recognize this is a really busy time of the year and appreciate each and every one of you for your work that you do to address ocean litter across the state and to protect our ocean. Before we delve into today's presentation, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous people of the lands and waters of where we live and work who stewarded this area. So California is home to one of the highest Native American populations in the United States. I would like to acknowledge that the land in which our planning team, Caitlin and I work on, is located within Oakland and Sacramento, and on the ancestral territory lands of Native tribes, including the Ohlone, Nisseon, Maidu, Mi'kmaq, Potwin, and Wintun peoples. We make these acknowledgements to remind us that no diversity, equity, inclusion, or justice work can be done without including the voices and wisdom of these Indigenous people of the land who are instrumental in creating what we now call as California. It is one of our Ocean Litter Strategy planning team goals to learn more about individual tribal histories, engage, and share ocean litter strategy collaboration opportunities with more Indigenous groups and peoples around the region. So if you know of any organizations that we should be in contact with, please reach out to us. So over the next 2 hours, we hope to use this webinar to provide updates on the ocean litter strategy implementation and monitoring process, strengthen our community and foster building, and learn about updates and developments from our community members and promote networking. To briefly go over our very jam-packed agenda, we have an amazing set of speakers that include updates from the ocean litter strategy, federal and state agencies, including NOAA, Ocean Protection Council, State Resource Council Board, and California Coastal Commission. We'll hear academic and research updates from California State University San Marcos and California Sea Grant. And then we'll have a discussion around policy and legislation updates from speakers including representatives from Senator Ben Allen, California State Senate Office, Surfrider Foundation, and California Product Stewardship Council. And then I'll close us off on wrapping us up for this year. Just a few brief webinar notes. This meeting is recorded to make it available on the OPC website. We will do our best to monitor the chat and especially encourage any of our guest speakers to respond to any questions in the chat if we are running out of time. If you have any tech issues, please let us know. Try leaving and rejoining the meeting first. And then if you're having computer audio issues, please try dialing in. And lastly, please feel free to use the chat box to network and converse. We really want this to be an open discussion. And just a few reminders on our open discussion. Please be mindful to the open diversity of perspectives that you'll hear today. Please keep comments constructive to the workshop's objectives and be respectful to all of our community members without any disparaging remarks. We're not here to point the finger. Today, we're here to work together. So in the spirit of togetherness, I'm going to kick it off, back off to Caitlin, who will go over our ocean litter strategy. Caitlin, off to you. Oh, we might.
Great tech check. My mic was muted. Christy, with that, let's move on to the next slide. Just as a by way of brief background, OPC's work on ocean litter began in 2007 when OPC adopted a resolution on reducing and preventing marine debris and resulted in the publication of the first ocean litter implementation strategy in 2008, which then was later jointly updated and developed in 2018 by NOAA Marine Debris Program. The California Ocean Litter strategy was developed by the California Ocean Protection Council with facilitation by the California Sea Grant, as well as a very robust stakeholder process. The 6-year plan includes 64 actions highlighting statewide priorities of land-based litter, microplastics, microfibers, and addressing fishing and aquaculture gear. Also, as one example of the strategy structure is listed on the slide in that partner organizations physically volunteer to lead individual actions of development of the strategy, which is listed within the actual strategy itself. And this is an example on the slide, essentially reflecting the very unique and inclusive stakeholder process that was used to develop the individual goals and actions of the multi-year strategy. Next slide. The 6 stakeholder goal areas are listed here and include source reduction through mandates and incentives, source reduction through production, design, and management, as well as other goals centered on waste management, including trash, research, behavior change, and education, as well as ocean-based debris prevention and cleanup. Next slide, please. We want to emphasize that this strategy and its implementation would absolutely not be successful without the incredible community of over 500 volunteer partners and organizations that actively work on actions, as well as who make significant progress in addressing marine debris in California. This includes environmentally focused nonprofits, state agencies, universities focused on research and monitoring, aquariums, sanitation, stormwater, and drinking water agencies and professionals. And as such, we do acknowledge that the ownership of this strategy belongs to the greater California community. Next slide, please. Over the past 4 years, Ocean Litter Strategy partners have met together regularly. We share ideas, provide updates on actions through these biannual webinars that take place generally every fall, as well as early summer, as well as goal-based work group meetings. So essentially divided between those 6 goals, meet in winter and summer, as well as submission of progress reports related to these goals and strategies every 6 months. As well as here's a snapshot of the implementation tracker that's used in the progress reports, as well as a way to collate the most up-to-date action items and updates. Next slide. This is a graph that shows the status of the 64 ocean litter strategy actions over the years and breaks down these as in a color code of blue. Those that are in progress, those that are completed in red, as well as not reported are in yellow. So we do think those who have provided progress reports in recent years, and as time goes on, we can see that we've begun to complete more actions and are increasing the number of actions that are currently being worked on or in progress. Next slide. We will note that to date, approximately 10% of the actions have approximately 10% of the actions have been marked as completed, but that the action language of many of the objectives and goals in the strategy most likely will remain in progress throughout the duration of the plan, as well as, well beyond the lifetime of this 2018 to 2024 plan. Let's see, my computer just crashed on me. That's wonderful. In any case, next slide, please.
And Caitlin, I'm happy to jump in if tech is being not friendly.
Yeah, do you mind, Christy? That would be wonderful.
No, not at all, not at all. That's adapting to the technology we have. So happy to jump in here. So with this graph, we see the most recent November 2022, not that time 2222, progress report covered the past 6 years. So this is our most recent collection period that was open October. So I want to thank everybody and those on the call that provided progress reports. This is really, really helpful for us. As you'll see, we have a lot of tied to goal 1, that's source reduction, and also a lot that were reported on ocean-based litter prevention and cleanup. So just want to thank those on the call for doing this. I think it really shows that we're working both on upstream solutions as well as downstream. And so just a note here that we're still accepting progress reports. So I will drop a link in after speaking today. And if you're interested into it, we'd love to hear your updates. Even if it's a no action, no updates to report, it's still really helpful for Caitlin and I. So again, appreciate all of you for all of your work on progress reports and attending our meetings. And with that, we're now going to be hearing from our amazing work group leads who have coordinated meetings the past few years, as well as in February and August of 2022. I want to thank all of our work group leads for their hard work in coordinating this and our awesome team of female leaders. We will go through each of our goal groups and let the work groups lead join us on camera. Caitlin can mute and unmute you. And we've asked each one to just provide 2 to 3 minutes of updates of the conversations that have happened over the past year. So with that, first up, I'd like to invite California Product Stewardship Council's Virginia McCormick, who'll be providing an update on goal 1 and 2. So Virginia, I see you there and I see you're unmuted, so off to you.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction, and hello everyone. My name is Virginia McCormick and I am a new associate with the California Product Stewardship Council. I joined CPSC in August of this year and I'm very excited to be joining today's meeting. Next slide. CPSC is a small but mighty team of 6. We are a nonprofit based out of Sacramento, but we work all over the state of California. Next slide. Our 14-member board is representative of many cities and counties across California. Next slide. We'd like to thank all of our wonderful associates across the state. Next slide. And a thank you to our sponsors. Our associates and sponsors are representative of the wide variety of parties who are working towards creating a circular economy. CPSC wouldn't be able to function without these important funders. Next slide. We believe the best way to create a circular economy that supports fair and sustainable waste management programs is by engaging the industry and producers of hard to manage products. Next slide. And as more problematic products are being banned from landfills, jurisdictions are having to put forth more of their own money in order to educate residents and find alternative ways to dispose of those products. In order to properly assist local governments feeling the brunt of this burden, CPSC strives to never ban without a plan. Next slide. So I'd like to go over some recent success stories. Starting at the local level, CPSC is working with 3 jurisdictions that you can see on the slide on safe marine flare management and disposal. Our staff has hosted many temporary marine flare collection events within these jurisdictions. We've partnered with Sirius Signal to provide discounts on reusable electronic marine flares, which does promote the switch from single-use to reusable marine flares in those jurisdictions. These events have been well received by residents, and they help to tackle this hard-to-manage product affecting our water communities. We also have 2 additional marine flare projects that are just starting up. At the state level, we have the passage of SB 54, which I'll be touching upon more later during our legislation update. Moving on, CARE submitted its 2023 and to 2027 carpet stewardship plan. CalRecycle has until this coming Monday to approve, conditionally approve, or disapprove the plan. In 2018, SB 212 established the Pharmaceutical and Sharps Waste Stewardship Program, and revised plans to expand upon that program are now in effect following CalRecycle approval. CalRecycle also approved MRC's updated used mattress recovery and recycling plan, which works to address illegal dumping by requiring mattress manufacturers to develop and implement a recover and recycle program for used mattresses, and by requiring retailers to offer no charge take back of used mattresses to customers once a new one has been delivered. And finally, at the international level, Alberta approved its new EPR regulations. These regulations apply to a variety of products and will go into effect on November 30th, 2022, which is just later this month. Alberta producers will be required to have fully operational EPR systems for the covered products and provide free collection of HHW by April 2025, and must keep 80% of the paper products out of the landfills by October 2027. So we're really excited to share these recent developments from our neighbors to the north and from the state and local levels. And one last success story I wanted to briefly mention. During this summer's work group meeting, CPSC's Special Project Manager, Joanne Brash, presented and walked through each active policy tied to marine debris and held an open discussion. Attendees to this meeting provided insight into other bills and their advocacy work related to the work group goals. Next slide. All right, thank you so much for your time. This is my contact information. If time permits, I can address any questions that our attendees may have. Otherwise, everyone is please feel free to reach out to me via email if you had any comments or questions.
Awesome, thank you, Virginia. With that, I would like to introduce Jenny Stevenson from the Environmental Protection Agency's Region 9. Jenny, there, I see you popping up. There you are. Hello.
Hello. Well, thank you all. So yeah, I wanted to give an update on Goal 3. And this work group is co-led by my colleague, Erica Jelinski. She's in our water division within EPA Region 9. I'm in our land division. So it's a nice kind of pairing of water and zero waste together, as this goal is to improve waste management and its interception of litter before it reaches the ocean. And most recently, during our August work group meeting, we had a presentation. Well, we had a few presentations. We had Grace Lee from the Clean Water Fund and Rethink Disposables, and Georgia Tinoli with the Bay Foundation present on the Rethink Disposable initiative, really focused on their new work in LA, talking about how they're building systems of reuse focused on businesses, particularly restaurants and communities, to make that switch from disposables to reusables. And Grace highlighted Clean Water Fund's Rethink Disposable success stories, including a lot of really strong economic data with net savings for restaurants and return on investments. And Georgia shared her insights on how the Bay Foundation collaborated with Rethink Disposable in LA, sharing their initiatives. And then, so after that great presentation, then the second half was getting other updates, because admittedly, Goal 3 work group doesn't have a lot of groups reporting on action items. So we really utilize those work group meetings to get some generalized updates that we can use to help inform those progress reports, which Caitlin and Christy highlighted at the start of this meeting. So the second half of our meeting, we heard from partners and active work group members. We got an update from the California State University of Sacramento, which has a grant from EPA looking at data and trash data specifically and how to analyze that. There was an update on the recent, I think this was a CASQA subgroup on the white paper on their true trash source controls, some combination of that. And then Wynne Gallagher with the Moore Institute of Plastic Pollution gave an update on the trash monitoring work group's data subcommittee on trash. So trying to help bridge those connections too, so we can leverage each other's efforts. And then lastly, we got an update from Leo Constantini with the State Water Resources Control Board, which provided a summary of the implementation work going on the statewide trash provision. So it was helpful to hear all those updates, and we really appreciate everyone joining in that work group, so then that could inform the implementation tracker. And then since I have the floor and I have big announcements from EPA, I do want to call your all's attention to 2 new grant programs and 1 new resource, and I'll put the link in the chat so you all can use it. But EPA just earlier this week with America Recycles Day, we announced a 2 grant programs which are most applicable for you all. The first one is our Solid Waste Infrastructure for Recycling. The acronym is SWIFR grant, and that has $40 million going to political subdivisions to work towards improving post-consumer materials management and infrastructure. And this can include source reduction, waste prevention, and reuse, along with recycling and composting. So that's one really exciting one to be on the lookout for. And then the second one that's applicable as well is Recycling Education Outreach Grant. That acronym there is REO. You know, we love good acronyms. And that's $30 million nationwide to improve consumer education and outreach on waste prevention, reuse, recycling, and composting. And the REO grant is available or open. Eligible entities include states, tribes, territories, local governments, and public-private partnerships, NGOs that aim to reduce waste generation and decrease contamination recycling stream. So please check those out. And then we also have a recycling toolkit, which includes, I think most relevant is a new resource on kind of mini module trainings on community-based social marketing. So how we can kind of design campaigns and outreach to change behavior, which is a lot of what we're all trying to do. So that's the update there. Thanks.
Thanks, Jenny. I appreciate your work group update and certainly updates on funding. I know those are always very exciting. That was shared with the Ocean Litter Strategy community, passed along as a newsletter, but we'll make sure to have Jenny add that into the chat as well. With that, I'm going to do a tech check and see, Caitlin, are you able to, have we figured it out?
I'm good.
Great, fabulous. Well, Caitlin will be speaking on behalf of Goal 4 Research Work Group.
Well, fantastic. So during the last work group meeting in August, this work group was very lucky to have California Sea Grant Fellow Tabitha Birdwell with the Delta Stewardship Council help facilitate the work group. And she created a mural board, which is displayed here to essentially create and collate updates from attendees related to research and the individual action items that are listed in the Ocean Litter Strategy. The work group also received a presentation from Dr. Una Ho with the San Diego State University School of Public Health, Division of Environmental Health on current research related to assessing the fate and toxicity of microplastics, with a very specific focus on chemical leaching from tire wear particles under coastal environmental conditions. Initial questions, or the questions under investigation, included chemical leaching from tire wear particles in water, fate under sunlight exposure, and whether particle size influences chemical leaching. And at the time of the presentation, the manuscript was still in development. Second, the work group shared updates and documented these recent actions using this mural board platform. It's a very interactive post-it process. It helped collect some great insight and updates on research and programs. And the mural board platform is also available in the California Ocean Litter Strategy resources folder, which, Christy, I believe you have linked on a later slide. So I'll just flag that for those who are interested in receiving this update.
Fantastic. Thanks, Caitlin. And I will be speaking on behalf of Vicki Patterson from Stand Up to Trash. She unfortunately could not be here today, but provided me some notes. So wanting to first and foremost thank Vicki for all of her amazing work. And during the last work group meeting in August, we were actually able to bring along my colleague, a NOAA Marine Debris Program Education Specialist, Alexandria Brake. And Alexandria provided updates on NOAA's education resources, new insights on our revamped marine debris monitoring and assessment protocol, and other initiatives, including NOAA's Sea to Sky resource collection of databases. The work group also discussed opportunities in Los Angeles's Unified School District with micro and macro plastic education, as well as efforts from the State Water Board, Division of Water Drinking, and microplastic subcommittees on messaging. And then we also heard updates on NOAA, EPA, and Materivault's work on microfiber pollution report, as well as some other reports shared. So really great call, and looking forward to being with Vicki and others in our February meeting. And last but not least, I would like to introduce our work group lead for Goal 6, Amelia Lab. Amelia, I see you're on now, so if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself, and the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Christy. I will be presenting on behalf of Goal 6, which is reduce the sources of ocean-based debris and maximize the efficiency of ocean-based debris cleanup. During our work group meeting in August, we had half of the meeting focused on a community presentation and half on information sharing sanction updates. Our guest speaker was Christy Kehoe, who provided updates on behalf of the NOAA Marine Debris Program and an overview of abandoned and derelict vessels, otherwise known as ADVs. She highlighted ADV issues, sources, unique challenges, and how the NOAA Marine Debris Program aims to support this issue by providing resources and opportunities. She also highlighted how the recent bipartisan infrastructure law funding and marine debris removal funding had an open competition at the time. The second half of the meeting was devoted to hearing from partners and meeting attendees for updates and high-level objectives around Goal 6. We also heard updates from the NOAA Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary Team, CSU Channel Islands, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the California Product Stewardship Council, which you can see documented here in the implementation spreadsheet. So we covered a lot in 2 hours. We had great discussions and are looking forward to our February work group meetings. Thanks.
Thanks, Amelia. And I know it was mentioned a few different times, but I wanted to remind folks on this call that all of the work group meetings and meeting notes and presentations are publicly available on our Ocean Litter Strategy Google folder. I will add in all these links for you, but just wanted to show you that this is available. If you have any issues accessing it or confused, please reach out to Caitlin and I, as we'd love to share this information. So I'm actually going to take the floor a few more seconds to talk about the Ocean Litter Strategy. So after our amazing work group leads and our August 22 workshops, we also had another exciting opportunity to highlight the OLS in a September event. We shared this at the prior June meeting, but wanted to reshare it here that we were thrilled that the Ocean Protection Council, California Sea Grant, and NOAA Marine Debris Program was selected to present at the 7th International Marine Debris Conference in Busan, South Korea. This event was organized by the United Nations and the Republic of Korea and is the largest international marine terrain gathering of its kind, attended around 900 participants in 89 countries. I was lucky enough to present alongside my former colleague, Tanya Torres, who is attending today and will be speaking later. So basically we had about 7 minutes, pretty short, but highlighting the amazing work of our Ocean Litter Strategy partners, our wonderful community, and then also speaking on behalf of OPC to highlight the microplastic strategy. I will say there was a lot of great interest and a lot of audience questions. And I also just wanted to do a shout out to the handful of folks that are on this call that were able to attend or may have had interest. Here are some highlight pictures. As you can tell by my longing face looking at Tanya and the presentation, I was having a blast and really, really loved my time there. The event was particularly touching as I was actually the lead planner for the 6th International Marine Debris Conference in San Diego back in 2018, where I was fortunate enough to meet a handful of our California community. So the goal of this conference was to inform, connect, and inspire. And so we were one of the abstracts across 100 technical sessions across 9 interdisciplinary areas. And so I will say the conference proceedings, as well as other resources such as Marine Pollution Bulletin, a virtual issue, will be made available on the 7 IMDC website. I can say I'm not exactly sure when the 8 IMDC will take place, but you'll be sure to know that we will make that available on our Ocean Litter Strategy listserv as well. All right, with that, I'm going to still hold the floor for a few more minutes and shift gears to focusing on federal agency updates. So I'll now be providing a high-level recap on the NOAA Marine Debris Program and our updates since we last presented in the Ocean Litter Strategy Workshop in June 2022. So for those that might not be aware on this call, NOAA was established as the federal lead to address marine debris in 2006 through the Marine Debris Act. Our mission is to investigate and prevent the adverse impacts of marine debris. And our team consists of around 30 people or so, half of which are based in Maryland and the rest are in our 11 regional offices. You'll see the federal definition of marine debris listed here, but in short, it's just any solid man-made material in the coastal marine or Great Lakes environment. This includes, as folks on the call know, anything from small-scale microplastics up to vessels and everything in between. And we're really lucky to be able to address this work through our amazing partnerships with state, local, and other entities on the ground who are able to do such amazing work. And so that's my good segue to want me to do a highlight of just our active partners of this year. So here is a snapshot of our currently active partners. We're really excited to announce our new fiscal year 22 partners through the US-Mexico-Canada agreement with One Cool Earth. I'm not sure if anyone from the One Cool Earth team is on this call, but a little background about this newer project based in the central coast of California. They will look into litter behaviors and youth to empower disadvantaged students with year-round culturally relevant marine debris lessons, as well as institutionalizing school-wide waste diversion. They've been a long-term partner with our program and have a lot of wonderful resources available on our website. I'm really excited how this newer project will also be incorporating, including Chumash Indigenous heritage, climate change, and other considerations. So in addition to this new project, I just want to take the opportunity again to thank all of our partners, past, present, hopefully future, that able for all the great work that you do. And if you're interested to learn a little bit more about what all these projects are, please visit our website. They're available. If you type in NOAA Marine Debris in California, it will be the first thing that pops up. I now want to change perspectives beyond California and provide an update on the national initiatives that impacts our state. So the first being the recent announcement of the bipartisan infrastructure law funding under the Biden-Harris administration. This act provides $30 million to NOAA for marine debris assessment, prevention, and removal for the next 5 years. So our program is really excited about this and expects to expend the majority of these funds through competitive funding opportunities. So we're currently in the review process for our fiscal year 22 bipartisan infrastructure law. This grant competition has since closed, so you aren't able to submit anything. But again, under review, we're focused areas looking at removal of large marine debris and using proven interception technologies for capturing debris. So at this time, unfortunately, I'm not able to share any more updates or additional information about this project. I'm not at this time able to also share any of our upcoming grant cycles, but I can say is please keep an eye on our website. I will also say the second anything becomes live or available, Caitlin and I will be sure to add anything to our listserv. And I also want to do a plug to what Jenny shared earlier. I'm equally excited as part of the federal family that the EPA just announced the bipartisan infrastructure law funding. I know Jenny just added that into the chat, but just really wanting to make sure that this was well known within our community as well, because there's a lot of really cool aspects of this. On another national note, I wanted to provide updates on the NOAA Marine Debris Program's collaborative work on microfiber pollution, as well as engagement with other California agencies. So as a recap, the Save Our Seas 2.0 Act of 2022 requires the Interagency Marine Debris Coordinating Committee. This is a federal family of different agencies that meet regularly to address debris. And so we, alongside the Environmental Protection Agency's Trash Free Waters, as well as consulting group Materivolve, have been working together to co-lead the creation of a report that was based in the Save Our Seas 2.0, located here. So earlier this fall, we had a 30-day public comment period when received a total of 29 public comments were received from the report. And these comments can actually be viewed publicly. If you go into regulations.gov, then type in microfibers, you actually can see all of them listed. And so as of right now, NOAA, EPA, and Materievolve are currently working through the public comments and finalizing the report. And I just want to do another shout out. I know a lot of folks from California provided public comment on this and just really appreciate your help with that. For folks that might not be aware, the report will provide Congress with an overview of the microfiber pollution, while also hoping to outline a path forward for federal agencies in partnership with our stakeholders to address the problem. So pictured here are the 5 goal areas outlined in the 5-year plan. Goal 1, to conduct, fund, and support research to address the most critical research needs related to microfiber pollution. 2, prevent and reduce microfiber pollution from textiles and other sources. 3, capture microfibers in major microfiber pollution pathways. The 4th, minimize toxicological hazards associated with the microfiber pollution. And the 5th is centered around tracking and implementing and knowledge sharing. So here are the agencies that have contributed to the plan, many of which are already members of the Interagency Marine Debris Coordinating Committee. And then I also want to do a shout out to the Expert Advisory Committee, who provided valuable insight. This is stakeholders from federal families and beyond, and with a handful of really great participation from California. I'm really excited about this report. As far as timelines, I know we are currently under the review of it and then hoping to make announcements coming over the coming years. I know microfibers is a very important topic for our community, so I will be sure to share any and all updates on our mailing list as well. And then on another more of an international note, I wanted to highlight exciting conversations happening relatively soon in the intergovernmental negotiating committees. So my colleague, NOAA Marine Debris Program International Specialist Steve Morrison provided an update on the United Nations and international treaty processes around plastics in June 2022. So I just wanted to share as an update that the first session of the INC will be held soon to develop an international binding instrument on plastic pollution, including the marine environment. And this event will take place in Uruguay on the 20th of November to early December. NOAA is not necessarily directly involved in the treaty negotiations, but we work really closely with our federal family and especially the State Department, who represents the United States. Please check out the Nation's Environmental website if you want to learn more about the event. And a few other resources I wanted to share was just a reminder that we have some really exciting new updates to our NOAA website. One opportunity is with the Marine Debris Monitoring and Assessment Project, which has been undergoing revamps throughout the past few years. As a highlight for those that might not be aware, this is a citizen science initiative that engages partners and volunteers from around the country to robustly survey our shorelines with the amount of debris and have that calculated in a visual display. We're hoping to make this data and the program itself more easily accessible to all communities. So we've started doing translations. So the first translation we have done thus far and training videos is in Spanish. So that is available online. And then we have a few other really great resources such as survey guidelines, categorization guides, and field data sheets to check out. We've also been making a lot of really great updates to our education webpage. And so wanted to highlight this here again, that if you do work in this field, we have updated this page and organized it a little bit easier for educators, students, kids, families, adults, and professionals. And we're hoping this is a little bit more easier to use and access for the work that you do. And then on a related education note, I am going to plug that the NOAA's Marine Debris Program's annual art contest to reach K-8 students is now open. Again, the goal of this is to help raise awareness on marine debris. Our team is always just incredibly awed by the talent of all the younger generations and the art. And we really love the ability to showcase the connection between this marine debris issues and a national audience. So the art contest for 2024 is open through December 16th of this year. So if you have little ones at home or know of any, please go to our website and download that, the art piece, or reach out to me if you have any questions. And with that, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today really briefly about NOAA and our work. And please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything I could ever do. I love the work we do and I love connecting. So again, my email is available here. And with that, we're going to switch gears to more on the state level. So Caitlin, I will kick it back off to you.
Fantastic. And as a brief reminder for all, there are 3 state agency updates before we transition to then research and academic updates, and then as well as policy and legislative developments from Senator Ben Allen's office and other partners on the state and federal level. So just as a midway reminder of the agenda. And with that, there's a question I received directly in the chat regarding an opportunity to receive the slides from presentations. And yes, all slides will be provided as well as the recording following this webinar and circulated on the OLS listserv. And with that, next slide, please. Just by way of brief introduction, again, Caitlin Kalua, I'm the Water Quality Program Manager of the California Ocean Protection Council, and I'll move on to the next slide. As a brief recap of brief and rather large recap of 2022, OPC adopted the state's first microplastic strategy on February 23rd of 2022 of this year, consistent with Senate Bill 1263, which was adopted by the California legislature in 2018. The strategy outlines a 2-track approach to achieving the overarching goal of increasing the state's understanding of the scale and risk of microplastics in California's marine environment, as well as identifying early actions to reduce microplastic pollution. Next slide. And at the forefront of the strategy is the recognition that plastic pollution is pervasive, but it's preventable. As one example, recent results from the Southern California Bight Regional Monitoring Program shown a significant decrease in the presence of plastic bags in the Southern California watersheds between 2013 and 2018, likely due to the implementation of the statewide plastic bag ban in 2016. Next slide. The first track of the statewide microplastic strategy reflects this need to reduce large plastic pollution, which the strategy is listed in green and blue on the right-hand side of your screen here, and reflects the goals outlined in the California Ocean Litter Strategy, which is provided in black on the left-hand side of the screen. That essentially recognizes that microplastics fall into 2 general categories. One, understanding that yes, primary microplastics are those that are intentionally produced at a very small size. Those are items such as microbeads and personal care products, but importantly that secondary microplastics are those that fragment from larger plastic products, which emphasizes the need to address and reduce larger plastic debris and pollution. Next slide, please. This statewide microplastic strategy also includes recommendations for stormwater and wastewater pathway interventions, consistent with Goal 3 of the California Ocean Litter Strategy, and outreach and education, as well as identifying sector-specific solutions that align with the Goals 5 and 6 of the California Ocean Litter Strategy. Next slide. The second track of this larger microplastic strategy also aligns with Goal 4, research of this California Ocean Litter Strategy, the larger marine debris objectives, and outlines research priorities that call for coordinated and simultaneous investments across these 4 main areas, which include monitoring, that includes the creation of a statewide monitoring network, risk thresholds and assessment to inform future regulatory or management action, sources and pathways prioritization, and evaluating new management solutions. Next slide, please. The final strategy requires essentially coordination and implementation from a wide range of state, federal, and local partners, and will inform state actions and investments over the next 4 years. OPC is committed to using the findings from these actions and the research priorities to provide additional recommendations to the California legislature once these actions are scheduled for completion by December of 2025. Next slide, please. Looking ahead to 2023, OPC will be pursuing actions to support the development of a future statewide plastics monitoring network designed to assess and quantify the occurrence of large plastic and microplastic contamination in California waters in order to determine the exposure and risk posed to aquatic life as well as California communities, and with the overarching recognition that we can't manage what we can't measure. This will include the development of standardized microplastic collection analysis methods, the completion of an existing wastewater microplastic removal and method development study in spring of 2023, and the development of a statewide both large plastic and microplastic monitoring network plan to help inform and initiate a pilot monitoring program beginning in 2024, which can also provide an important baseline of determining the future efficacy of management actions, including those of Senate Bill 54, which will be discussed later in this webinar, which was adopted by the state legislature this year, designed to reduce and evaluate whether its efficacy in reducing plastic in California waters. Second, OPC will be partnering with California Sea Grant to release a request for proposals in early 2023 that's intended to advance the research needs and priorities outlined in the microplastic strategy. This is related to source attribution, risk thresholds, as well as management. And finally, OPC is in the process of scoping sector-specific workshops, including textiles, here's a lint ball, to help inform sector-specific solutions and avoid regrettable product or material alternatives or substitutes with interagency partners in 2023. Next slide. Finally, OPC adopted its equity plan last month, which will be integrated into all plastics programs done by OPC, which will include outreach and engagement for vulnerable communities as well as tribes to inform research and monitoring consistent with the objectives 2A 3.1 and 2A 3.2 of the statewide microplastic strategy. Next slide. The public is encouraged to become engaged in these upcoming actions by participating in the Water Quality Monitoring Council's Microplastics Subcommittee, as well as the California Ocean Litter Strategy Workgroup meetings and webinars such as these. Relevant links are provided on this slide. Next slide, thank you. And that concludes my update. I will now turn to Dr. Scott Coffin.
Thanks, Caitlin. Alrighty, giving a quick update on what we're doing on the State Water Board side. Next slide, please. Alrighty, so as a reminder, we've got Senate Bill 1263, which Caitlin really covered pretty well. I will be talking a little bit about what we're doing for the risk assessment framework and the standardized methods briefly. Next slide, please. As a reminder, we also have a mandate to deal with microplastics in drinking water, prompted by a study in 2017 finding that 94% of samples in the United States had detectable levels. Next slide, please. Senate Bill 1422. Most of these requirements have already been met. The 4 years of testing and analysis plan was recently adopted in September of this year, and we'll be kicking off monitoring for that starting the end of next year. Next slide, please. A little briefly about the work that we did for the standardized method and the ongoing work that remains. Next slide. As a reminder, for those that weren't involved, we conducted an interlaboratory validation study for spectroscopy methods for microplastics involving 26 laboratories. We wrapped this up for drinking water earlier this year, but we are continuing to validate and publish SOPs for the remaining matrices, ocean water, fish tissue, and sediment. So look out for those in the coming future. Next slide, please. We also conducted earlier this year third-party assessor training, which allows laboratories from around the world to become accredited for microplastics through the State Water Board's ELAP program. This was a highly successful event in which the ELAP accreditors, the third-party assessors, the study authors, and our friends at the Moore Institute for Plastic Pollution Research all work together collaboratively to both understand the method and improve the method. More information can be found on the State Water Board website. Next slide, please. For those laboratories that are interested in becoming accredited, just make sure that you check the ELAP website and get up to date on what is required for the inspections and documentation. We don't currently have performance evaluation samples, but we are working on developing those, as well as quality criteria for laboratories. Next slide, please. As far as quality criteria, proficiency testing samples goes, many analytical methods that are required for monitoring typically have a proficiency testing sample. We don't currently have one for microplastics. However, we are partnering with NIST as well as Hawaii Pacific University to develop these specifically for regulatory purposes. This would be a fairly basic sample that is not representative necessarily of the microplastics that we'll find in drinking water or other matrices, but we will down the line develop these more complicated performance evaluation samples so that additional monitoring is more reliable and robust. Next slide, please. We also have an ongoing project partnering with Ryerson University, as well as some laboratories across the world, as well as in Southern California, to develop an open source database and fingerprinting platform for plastic speciation. Ideally, this will allow us to determine the manufacturer of the product and the oil source. More to come once we have some data from this project available. Next slide, please. As a reminder, Senate Bill 1422 and 1263 both required that the State Water Board and the OPC develop a risk assessment framework. So I'll briefly talk about what we did for that, just as a reminder. Next slide, please. We conducted a human and ecological health effects workshop. This largely wrapped up the beginning of this year, late last year, in which we evaluated the dose metrics, particle characteristics that cause toxicity, adverse effects and their mechanisms, and derived thresholds for management. Next slide, please. You can go ahead and skip this slide. Just want to be cognizant of our time. Really, we identified 3 microplastics hazards: chemical-based, biological-based, in which the particles act as a vector for pathogens, and the particles themselves causing toxicity. We focused primarily on the particle-mediated toxicities for this analysis. Next slide, please. We're still keeping track of the harmful chemicals. Recent report found 2,400 substances of concern are added to plastics worldwide, of which 53% are unregulated. This is something that we continue to investigate, whether or not this is an issue for aquatic ecosystem health as well as human health. Next slide, please. As a reminder, Senate Bill 1422 has a requirement that we either consider adopting a health-based guidance level or some type of qualitative guidance to inform consumers about what microplastics might mean for their health. Next slide. For human health, we started with 29 mammalian toxicity studies, literature review. We screened them for quality, and we're left with 12 studies that underwent additional expert review, in which we found some additional findings. Next slide, please. The majority of the evidence that we have that's reliable for microplastics are for male reproductive impacts, as well as a limited information for female reproductive impacts. Based on this assessment, we were able to conclude that likely these effects are occurring in mammals, but it's unclear at what concentrations they're occurring in humans, if at all. Next slide, please. Therefore, we were not able to derive regulatory levels. We did identify 3 key data gaps, including an inadequate effects database, uncertain effect mechanisms, and incomplete exposure data. And these research findings or research needs are currently informing ongoing and future work. Next slide, please. As a reminder, Senate Bill 1263 requires we develop this risk assessment framework for aquatic ecosystems as well as humans. Next slide. We identified 4 hazards of microplastics for aquatic organisms, including entanglement, food dilution, internal lacerations, as well as cellular toxicity. Next slide. We derived species sensitivity distributions for food dilution, as well as tissue translocation mediated toxicities using reliable species toxicity data from our database. Next slide. Based on this evidence, we were able to develop 4 different management thresholds for 2 different particle-mediated toxicity effects, food dilution and tissue translocation. Currently, the 3rd management threshold or management planning is being used as a draft numeric guideline for evaluating risks of microplastics in California's waters. Next slide, please. All of the papers from this work are published in an open access special issue of the journal Microplastics and Nanoplastics. I can drop a link in the chat after this. Next slide, please. And this is an interactive slide that's apparently not showing, but as a reminder, we developed an interactive data portal to house microplastics toxicity data. If you know anyone that is developing toxicity information or doing these type of studies, let them know about the app so that they can upload it. Next slide, please. And we're also going to be hosting a workshop in early January. January 11th is a tentative date. Maybe put on your calendar for the morning in pencil, so to speak. So the goal with this is to update the Tomex database. This is an open invite for anyone around the world. It's going to be a virtual workshop. There's going to be 3 days, each spaced apart by 1 month, in which we'll update the database, derive additional thresholds, ask new questions, perform new meta-analyses. We're anticipating a handful of peer-reviewed manuscripts to come out of this. So if anyone is interested in doing that type of work, make sure you follow Tomex app on Twitter, because that is the best way to find out information about when we're going to announce the dates. Next slide, please. Really briefly, I'll talk about what we actually did with these thresholds in characterizing risks for microplastics in San Francisco Bay and what that means for monitoring going forward. Next slide, please. We applied surface water monitoring concentrations obtained via Mantitrol to these risk thresholds and found significant exceedances of at least the conservative investigative monitoring threshold for most regions within the Bay. Outside of the Bay, most of the samples were below even the most conservative threshold, which is demonstrating that risks are unlikely for out in the open ocean for microplastics. Next slide, please. You can skip the slide. It was supposed to be a video, not coming through. One of the main uncertainties with this assessment is we had to rescale the particle sizes to a common distribution. Mantitrols, they miss the small particles because they're only getting down to about 333 microns. And this results in high uncertainties of this risk characterization as shown with these dotted lines in the error bars. Next slide, please. Just briefly on that, anyone doing monitoring on microplastics and surface waters, I would highly recommend that you do some sort of inline filtration. That way you're getting the small particles and it will prevent the high uncertainties on the risk characterization end. If you want to learn more about that, please drop me a line or check out our peer-reviewed manuscript to learn more. So briefly, I'll talk about what we're doing with the 4 years of testing and how that's going to coincide with the Ocean Litter Strategy's objectives. Next slide, please. We passed the 4-year monitoring plan in September of this year. Looks like some of the text on the slide got messed up, but effectively this is an iterative approach in which we'll be doing additional research and infrastructure building until summer of next year. Fall of next year, water systems will receive monitoring orders and be required to monitor in their source waters. There'll be about a 2-year delay after this. Maybe go back again, there we go. There'll be a 2-year delay after phase 1 in which we'll evaluate the data and go back into additional monitoring. A lot of the monitoring for the source waters for drinking water will also give us information about the occurrence statewide in freshwaters. And some of these freshwaters are aquatic ecosystems as well. Next slide, please. This is a draft map of where these water systems are. You can see mostly around the highly populated areas in California, but also we have a little bit of geospatial diversity, which is strategically planned. Next slide, please. We are holding a workshop early in the spring to call for input on where we monitor specifically within each of these water systems. If you are interested in that, be sure to subscribe to the microplastics part of the State Water Board's website on the listserv, which you should be able to get an email from that. Next slide, please. Another thing that we're doing that will coincide with a lot of the monitoring that's going on in the aquatic ecosystems is doing some type of inline filtration. We currently have an ASTM sampling protocol. This is the only standardized protocol for sampling microplastics in which it uses gravity filter sieves. Unfortunately, this method is highly susceptible to contamination from aerial atmospheric contributions as well as the operator's clothing. We're trying to move past this and get into a fully enclosed inline filtration system for effectively all of the uses that we can use it for. Next slide, please. This is a brief schematic of what this looks like. We'll be optimizing this for drinking water over the next few months and trying to automate as many processes as we can. This involves computers that will change the flow rate based on the loading of the particles on the filters. It'll record the flow rate automatically. It's pretty neat. Hopefully we'll be able to adapt it for other purposes beyond drinking water as well. Next slide, please. Another critical component of this pilot sampling project, or the pilot phase project, is building out a database to house the high resolution data sets that we anticipate to receive. Microplastics data sets are extremely complex. We have, for each particle in the sample, you want to document the size, the shape, the polymer, the color, and sometimes additional information. our current databases of the state system are not capable of handling that. And people format their data in many different ways out there. So we're trying to harmonize and standardize that and build a data repository for the state that can handle this database. Next slide, please. We're working with the Moore Institute for Plastic Pollution Research and the San Francisco Estuary Institute to develop an open source data portal using CCAN, which is the same code that the data.ca.gov is built on. And this will allow anyone that does monitoring for microplastics in California to upload their data to the portal, whether it be for surface water, ocean water, drinking water, any matrix can all live in the same microplastic specific database and have the full spectrum of data associated with it. Eventually, we'd like to roll this out and make this a global database that anyone in the world can upload information to. That way we can have Tomex as well as this data portal and be able to compare occurrence and risk. There we go. So as you all know, microplastics knowledge is increasing rapidly. Currently, the publication rate is 2.2 peer-reviewed articles per day. It's possible to keep up. And there's a lot of tools and information and databases that are constantly being rolled out. Next slide, please. That's why I created the Plastiverse. Bookmark it, plastiverse.org. Our mission is to remove barriers on plastic research and act as a centralized hub for databases, tools, information, as well as a community hub for sharing thoughts and ideas about how to address this global issue. Next slide, please. This is also supposed to be a video, not working through the PDF version, but you can go to the website and just check it out. Next slide, please. Cool. So thank you all for your attention. As always, I always put all my slides on ResearchGate. If you want to check it out for more, you can also tweet at me, and I'll be dropping those helpful things into the chat. Thank you all.
Great. Next, we'll invite Evan Schwartz with the California Coastal Commission. Evan, I'll see if we can get you unmuted. One moment. Oh, you are unmuted. You're set.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Hi, thanks everybody. Thanks for the invitation to join you and all the incredible information. I really appreciate it. I'm with the California Coastal Commission, and I run our marine debris programs, including our cleanup programs, which is the first update that I want to provide. In September, we ran our first in-person cleanup in several years now. And I'm sure many of you on the call were attending a cleanup somewhere across California or elsewhere, since it's an international event. If your experience was anything like mine, the relief was palpable among the volunteers. And we had a great day. We had over 35,000 volunteers turn out. We picked up over 300,000 pounds of trash in the course of only 3 hours. So it was really remarkable. It's not quite back to pre-COVID capacity yet. I think we're all a little bit out of practice on getting together in large groups at this point. So it may take a few years to ramp back up to our full capacity. But in the meantime, we were really happy to see everybody out there. We continue to encourage people to run the self-guided neighborhood cleanup that we developed during the height of COVID in order to keep volunteers safe. It's very easy to participate. You just grab the materials you need from your own home and use the CleanSwell app, which is developed by Ocean Conservancy and houses all of the coastal cleanup data that we gather. If you record your cleanup in the app, then you will be recorded as part of the statewide totals moving forward, and you can clean up whenever you want. So very exciting. We had a really great turnout over the course of the entire month, and it will continue on all the way through the end of December when the official window for data collection closes. The other very brief update I have is on the regulatory side of the Coastal Commission's work. The vast majority of the work that we do is regulatory and enforcement around the Coastal Act. And we embarked on a project to incorporate plastic pollution reduction measures into the regulatory side of the Commission's work. So to develop standard guidance for our planners, our permit analysts, our enforcement folks, and even our planning people to build plastic pollution reduction measures into all the different types of permits that we issue each year. There are a huge number of different types of projects that come before the commission for approval. So the scope of the different types of actions that we would recommend for different types of permits are also extraordinarily broad. We've been discovering that in this past year as we've been developing an inventory of actions that the commission has already taken around plastic pollution reduction. And there's quite a few already, but there's many areas that we have yet to explore and to develop new guidance for, since it isn't a typical consideration for many of our permit analysts. But our leadership is committed to this, and we're going to be moving forward. We're ending phase 1 at this point. At the end of December, phase 1 of this project will be complete, which will be the inventory of past commission actions, as well as the full development of an internal task force to guide this project. That inventory will be available on our website once it's complete, and we'll also be mapping each of the past commission actions in an interactive way and adding to that map as new actions are taken. Moving into phase 2 of this project, we will actually be developing the sample guidance for every type of different project that that comes before us. And the end of phase 2 will be official commission approval of the guidance that will then go into action for all of our permit analysts. So that should be happening by the end of year 3 of this project. So by the end of June 2024, I think. Pretty sure that's right. So it's an exciting development. We have a lot of staff support on it and a lot of interest in this topic as there's growing awareness even among our own staff of the different actions that we're able to take to help reduce this problem at all stages of the development level. And that is it for the Coastal Commission. So thank you very much for the time.
Fantastic. Thank you, Evan. With that, we are going to transition to academic and research updates. We are tracking time, and just given the flow of today's webinar, we encourage those who have questions, please feel free to include them in the chat. You know, we may be able to elevate them. Otherwise, those who previously spoke, keep an eye out. Maybe answers can be provided physically in the chat function as well. Pending time at the end, we may have an opportunity for those to weigh in. But with that, we're going to move on to Dr. Gerardo Dominguez of California State University, San Marcos, who's going to provide his research findings and updates from a CSU Coast funded project. And with that, I'll hand it over.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Will you be sharing? Oh, perfect. So thank you so much for the opportunity and invitation to talk here today. I'm Gerardo Dominguez. A lot of the work that I'll present was done by Dr. Sarah Bellance, who's a postdoctoral researcher here at Cal State University, San Marcos. Next slide, please. So we're all very familiar with pictures like this, depicting, showing us plastic pollution in the environment. And what I'm going to sort of focus on today is a theme of scale and length scales, really. So a lot of the pieces of plastic that you see here in these pictures have a length scale of approximately 1/3 of a meter, right? If you think about a foot being a characteristic size of these pieces of plastic or plastic bags, 1/3 of a meter is about that scale length. Next slide, please. So, a fundamental question, of concern is what happens to all of this plastic? So I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with the missing mass problem surrounding plastics. We know how much gets produced by industry, and we have only detected about 1% of what should be there on the surface of the ocean. So likely some of the plastics that make it into the environment are degraded by UV light and broken down. And that's the key question, is what are they broken down into, and what's the size of micro and then microplastics that get formed from these particles, this pollution. There are potentially significant impacts for aquatic life and human life because there's emerging research showing that the smallest pieces of plastic can be small enough to essentially embed themselves in the cell membranes of humans. So as molecular dynamics simulations have shown. So that kind of embedding into human or into cellular life, has unknown but potentially significant effects on cellular function. Next slide, please. So microplastics is something that we're all very familiar with. And on the left, I'm showing you an optical photograph of debris, including microplastics in water. And on the right, I'm showing you some, debris or stuff that's in the air. And what I want you to focus on is the fact that you're essentially using light, right? And in this case, it's optical light to see these particles. But what happens when the particles become smaller than the wavelength of light? That's a really fundamental challenge that we face with nanoplastics. So how do we see nanoplastics? Next slide, please. So to understand how potentially big of a problem we have, I think it's important to go small. And so I want you to visualize, and obviously this is not drawn to scale, a 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter chunk of plastic. So 1 millimeter is 1/1000th of a meter, right? So if you imagine cutting up that, that piece of plastic, that bag, into 1,000 sort of pieces, and end up with something small, that's what we want to start off with. And just for reference, a micrometer is 1/millionth of that length scale, and a nanometer is 1/billionth. So you chop up that length, about a foot, a third of a foot, I should say. A meter, and you chop it up into 1 billion small pieces. That is a nanometer. So next slide, please. All right, so here's a little quiz. If you take a 1 millimeter cubic piece of plastic and you let it decompose into, or it decomposes into 10 nanometer chunks of plastic, how many chunks do you make? Is it A, 1 million, B, 10 million, C, 100 million, D, 1 billion, or E, question mark? So feel free to answer in the chat if you feel comfortable doing that, but it's okay if you don't. So next slide, or the answer. So the answer turns out to be none of those, well, maybe E, if you interpret it broadly, right? 10 to the 15 particles, and it's a simple sort of math problem, but that's a huge number of particles, right? That I don't even know what the word is. It's 1,000 trillion, I guess, would be one way to say this. That's an astonishing number of particles from just a 1 millimeter chunk piece of plastic. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so how do we detect and identify chunks of matter that small? So we can't use optical microscopes because for the reason that I stated before, right? These chunks of matter are much too small to be seen with optical wavelengths. Infrared microscopes are great for classifying or for giving us spectral signatures, but the problem is even worse with infrared microscopes when you're talking about nanometer scale particles. And I should just say, infrared microscopes are great and have been proven to be fantastic for identifying and classifying particles that are bigger than 5 microns to 10 microns. Next slide, please. So one approach, and this is the approach that we're taking in my lab, and we've taken in the past, is to study cometary dust particles, is to combine atomic force microscopy with infrared light sources. And so this is what we call nano-IR. So one variation of nano-IR that we used, so an atomic force microscope allows you to detect and to map out surface roughness topography. So if you have a smooth surface and you detect a little hill, then you know that you have a particle. The infrared light portion of this technique allows you to classify or to obtain spectral signatures. So we showed that this was possible for small, 5 micron pieces of of cometary dust, and we were able to map out minerals within individual grains. And so we're trying to do this for the problem of nanoplastics in our lab. Next slide, please. So we've actually done this. So we've shown that you can take a 200 nanometer polystyrene, what we call a standard. There really aren't any standards. These are polystyrene-like particles that we found, from Sigma Aldrich. We dissolved them in water, deposited them on a gold-covered slide, and we can find the particles with the AFM portion, which I'm showing there on the left. That's just a topographical image. And what's key to this technique is that on the right, I'm showing you the infrared image. So we can set a laser to, in this case, 1492 inverse centimeters, right, which is in the infrared portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. And we can actually, quote unquote, see these particles by the way they interact with the atomic force microscope and the infrared light. And so what we noticed, and I think you'll see some differences between the image on the left and the right, is that there is extra stuff there on the slide that's not really necessarily apparent with the topography. On the right side, we actually can see nanofilms of these particles, these polystyrene-like particles that have just sort of degraded and just in the time scale that we had them in the lab. So those films are nanoplastic films that we were able to see quite easily because of the infrared light. Next slide, please. So in more recent work, Sarah has been focusing on the simplest problem that we could think of, which is to look for nanoplastics in bottled water. And indeed, there are nanoplastics, or we could call them micro nanofilms, because some of these particles do approach a micron in size, but they're very thin. They're maybe 10, 15 nanometers in thickness. So this has been a really interesting sort of observation. And what you'll notice in that zoom in of that infrared image is that there's a sort of a cubic sort of particle there. That we think is probably a crystal of salt of some sort that precipitated out of the solution out of this water droplet that was taken from a commercial bottled water. So again, we are seeing nanoplastics in bottled water, and exactly how many of them, that's work that Sarah is working on quantifying or estimating based off of microliter samples of these bottled water samples. Next slide, please. So it's one thing to see them, but then of course to classify them, you have to take spectra off of these individual particles. And that's the second part of our project, which is that we are using our spectra and feeding them into OpenSpeccy to give us confidence intervals as to the detection. So in this case, I think this particle had a correlation coefficient of 0.8, and I think it was I think the best match was high density polyethylene. Next slide, please. Great. So I'm going to conclude by thanking the folks responsible for funding really a lot of Sarah's time, the Cal State University Coast, for funding this work. I'd also like to thank NASA, which funded the instrumentation to analyze return samples. So we are actually also working on analyzing samples from a Japanese space mission, and next fall we'll be busy looking at samples for the OSIRIS-REx mission. And lastly, but not least, Amy Vieira for some really useful feedback on an earlier version of this presentation. Thank you so much for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. For our next speaker, I'm going to introduce someone who may be familiar to some of those on this call, is Tanya Torres, who is a Marine Debris Associate of the California Sea Grant. She was formerly a Sea Grant Fellow under the NOAA Marine Debris Program and facilitator of the Ocean Litter Strategy for multiple years. So thank you, Tanya. If you can unmute at any time and you can begin.
Thank you, Caitlin. Can you hear me all right?
Sounds perfect.
Okay, great. So yes, hi everyone. Nice to see everyone again. It's really nice to be back with my Ocean Litter Strategy family. I will be providing a short and brief update from the California Sea Grant program. And for those who don't know, California Sea Grant is a very unique federal, state, university partner that's focused on providing coastal research, extension, outreach, and education to stakeholders across the state. So you can go to the next slide, please. So most recently, some of our updates, marine debris updates for the program is that I actually represented California Sea Grant as a fellow, an extension fellow, back in September, and I presented alongside Christy at the 7th International Marine Debris Conference that was already mentioned today, so I won't go too much into that, but we presented on the work we've been doing with the ocean litter strategy as well as the microplastic strategy. And then shortly after that, October of this year, I was hired on with the program as their new marine debris research associate. So very excited that I get to still be around and working in this space. Next slide, please. And then some of the things that California Sea Grant have been working on is that we are drafting our new strategic plan that will go into effect in early 2024. And so our strategic plan not only just guides our program activities, but also provides our priorities to prospective applicants who are applying for funding. And so these are our focus areas. And something unique about this new plan is that we are specifically calling out focal topics such as marine debris, land-based sources of trash, microplastics, and other contaminants. I would like to highlight those of you who happen to be on the call that perhaps provided feedback and guidance. We're still in the process of developing the plan, but just wanted to shout out and say thank you for everyone who has helped with that. Next slide, please. And then something that Caitlin has already mentioned, but just to reiterate, something to put on your radar is that California Sea Grant is partnering with the Ocean Protection Council to put out a call for microplastics research. And there's potential to have some federal infrastructure funds be leveraged for that as well, but that's to be determined. We're just hoping to help implement some of the statewide microplastic strategy priorities. And so that will likely be announced in early 2023. Next slide, please. And so something else just to put on your radar as well is that the California Sea Grant program has submitted a few proposals to the National Sea Grant Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act marine debris competitions that had just closed. But there were two different competitions, one a Special H Community Action Coalition competition, which California Sea Grant, University of Southern California Sea Grant, and the Ocean Protection Council are partnering to advance equitable resources to marine debris solutions through the California Ocean Litter Strategy. It's something that we've been talking about for a while, but our goal is to maybe strengthen the diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and accessibility focus of our Ocean Litter Strategy community and our program here to increase just more equitable and justice in producing litter pollution solutions throughout California. So I'm really looking forward, and hopefully we'll get some funds that'll go to that specifically. And then a few of the other proposals we submitted were for the Marine Debris Challenge competition, which is a little more focused on research to application. And so the first proposal we submitted was in partnering with the California Marine Sanctuaries Foundation to pilot commercially scalable end-of-life solutions for agricultural field plastics in the Monterey Bay area. That is like more of a specific type of plastic that we're looking at, but should be very interesting. We're working with a lot of actual agricultural producers in the area. And so that's a little bit of a uniquer project that I'm excited about. And then the last two are trying to advance the, again, research priorities of the microplastic strategy. And so there's a proposal we submitted to support a pilot statewide macro and microplastics monitoring network that Caitlin mentioned earlier. We will be working with OPC, if funded, right? We submitted with OPC, San Francisco Estuary Institute, as well as partnering with the Moore Institute for Plastic Pollution Research and the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, AKA SQUIRP. And then the last one, OPC and California Sea Grant also submitted a proposal to advance the effective low impact development approaches to manage macro and microplastic debris. So hopefully these get funded. We don't think all of them will, but hopefully a couple will. And we'll have a lot more, more to update on in the future, and some good work coming out of both of these agencies. So thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Tanya, and happy to have you back here. So we'll now be moving on to hearing from three speakers about policy and legislation updates. So I would like to introduce our next speaker, Tina Angelina, Senior Policy Consultant for Senator Ben Allen's office, who also was kind enough to present a year ago. So we're really happy to have you back and share these exciting updates. We'll then hear from Surfrider and California Product Stewardship Council. So Tina, feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. I am super excited to be here a year later after giving you guys an update on where we were with our efforts to clean up plastic pollution and the waste that was generated from packaging in California. I know OPC and others have been very helpful in helping us put together policy here in California to help tackle this problem. And I am so excited to be able to report that this year we were able to get SB 54 across the finish line. And I'm super excited to tell you all about what that policy looks like, what we were able to accomplish. Next slide. As folks know from the last update a year ago, we've been working on this effort for 4 years. We came close in 2019 and 2020 to getting something done. COVID slowed us down. But when a group of our supporters was able to qualify a ballot measure, which would have been on this November's ballot just now, that really lit a fire under a bunch of our stakeholders and encouraged folks to come to the table in a really, really meaningful way to see if, given the legislature's opportunity to pass legislation to get something off the ballot, if we could take that opportunity and really craft a policy that could generate enough support within the legislature to overcome what would be a 2/3 vote hurdle, would win enough support within the environmental community to encourage the ballot proponents to take the ballot measure off the ballot, but then also be workable enough for our business partners that we could actually develop a consensus approach. We began working really hard in the fall, last fall, a year ago, to see if we could craft a policy that would meet all of those criteria and get something passed. And given the way the legislature works, we had a end of June deadline to pass a bill and get it signed and have the ballot measure proponents pull that measure in order for our measure to take effect. So it was a very truncated process and took hours and hours and hours. It did take years, 4 long years, and then hours and hours, hundreds of hours of work from a pretty robust group of stakeholders to put together what became SB 54, and the governor signed this past June, like the last day he could have, June 30th. That's when we got it done. We got through 2 houses of the legislature, got 2/3 votes, got the proponents to pull their ballot measure, and got it signed all within like 24 hours. It was a pretty crazy process. Very exciting. So next slide. So let me tell you what the bill does. So we went in with 3 key policy aims. We wanted to reduce the amount of single-use plastic that was coming on the market through either packaging or foodware. So, forks, spoons, bowls, cups, etc. We wanted to reduce that amount coming on the market to begin with. And then whatever was left on the market, one of our top aims was to ensure that anything left was going to be fully recyclable and fully compostable. And that applied to everything, not just plastics. And then the last policy pillar we were aiming for was to require the producers of this material to take responsibility, including covering the cost of the end of life management for that material. So those were our 3 aims going into it. The producer responsibility component we had seen in other countries. It was not, Europe's been doing this for quite some time. Requiring recyclability and compostability, that was new. We hadn't seen that before, that began, we began pushing that in SB 54, and source reduction, that hadn't been done anywhere in the world. So we really, in the 8 months or so we had to put this together with those 3 policy aims, some of this we had to make up out of whole cloth. Next slide. And, you know, so let me talk for a minute about why we felt it was so important to use this producer responsibility model based off of what we learned in places like the European Union and some locations in Canada. You really see once producers are given the responsibility to manage end of life for their material, they make different decisions. So, you know, we've all gone to the grocery aisle and you see that big bright orange bottle of Tide, which is wholly not recyclable because it's orange, but Tide is orange, so your eyeballs see it, right? So their bottom line isn't designed to account for the cost of managing that material. Their bottom line is clearly aimed at just catching your eye so you buy their product. We needed to flip that. We needed the producers to have a stake in designing their material to ensure it could be pulled through our recycling system, to ensure that there would be a market for that material, that it could actually be turned into new material. Unless they are told that they are responsible for achieving that, they will only focus on what it takes to sell their product. So we knew that we had to shift the conversation and put producers in charge of dealing with the financial implications of what they were putting on the market. And that was a real shift in thinking from where we were, you know, when we started this journey at the start of 2019, when we were thinking we were going to really put together sort of a top-down regulatory approach, shifting to this producer responsibility model based on the success we had seen in other locations. You know, we really felt like it was a critical component of ensuring we accomplished our goals. Next slide. Okay, so here is what we ended up with: 4 key components. And sorry that the font is wrong. I can see that there. It's going to bug me. There are 4 key parts of the bill. Like I mentioned, the source reduction and the sustainable packaging. And I'm going to talk more about the goals that we were able to get in both of those. And then our mechanism for shifting that responsibility to the producers was requiring that they form what's called a producer responsibility organization, or a PRO, and ensuring that we've got, you know, efficient management of the material, and then putting the state at the helm of oversight and enforcement. And then the other really tough part of this bill was the fees and funding mechanism, which I'll speak to at the end. But just a sneak peek, the ballot measure had funding to go to state agencies to mitigate some of the plastic pollution that was that we've all seen in our communities, in our waterways, in our oceans, et cetera. So we knew that we had to figure out a way to replicate that in SB 54, which had, you know, that was not in any other program globally. But we knew that was something that we had to have in this bill if we were going to convince the ballot proponents to pull the measure. Next slide. So here's what we came up with on source reduction. And I will tell you, when we first pulled stakeholders together, we made the decision to see if we can land this plane first. Like, let's see if we can figure out this policy first, because if we couldn't, we knew that the environmental community would not be with us. If we couldn't accomplish real source reduction, they would not pull the ballot measure, and we'd be wasting everybody's time, you know, putting together a producer responsibility organization that was going to go nowhere. But this was the hardest piece, again, because we had to make it up. Like, we had no template to work from. The only thing we had seen in other locations was, you know, banning straws or banning, you know, balloons, like, you know, banning, a subset of products, as opposed to actually getting a real percentage reduction over the aggregate, over the entire market. So it was really tough to negotiate. But our environmental supporters, folks like Oceana, NSAC, Ocean Conservancy, really pushed us, which was fantastic. And we achieved this amazing result. So we've got a 25% reduction over all plastic covered material coming into the state, with 10% of that having to come from reuse, refill, or elimination. And then to back it all up, we've got these reuse refill targets that you see here. And the reuse refill targets were incredibly important because we wanted to ensure that the producers were actually investing in the infrastructure that was going to be necessary to shift that marketplace, right? If they could get all of their reductions from, elimination or lightweighting or concentrating their material, all of those are great to reduce the amount of plastic pollution that is coming into our environment, but it doesn't shift the conversation the way we really wanted to see that conversation shifted. We need to see these companies investing in reuse, refill. So we put those initial targets in there. And the hope is that going forward, we'll see those targets increase over time, just like we did with other policies like our renewable portfolio standard. So this is just a down payment on those efforts. And one of the really key components that we pushed hard to keep in the bill was ensuring that CalRecycle could actually increase those reuse and refill targets or the source reduction numbers if it came to pass that companies were just putting so much more material on the market that they were undoing any reductions. So there's a mechanism in place to increase those requirements moving forward without even for future legislation. So that was really exciting. Next slide. And then, of course, ensuring that everything else that's still on the market, all the material, paper, cans, glass, etc., all that material is truly recyclable. And we base this off of the definitions we had in SB 343, which requires the material to actually be turned into a new product, or meet our really high compostable definition that Mr. Ting established in AB 1201. So anything that is coming on the market, any packaging whatsoever by 2032 will have to be recyclable or compostable. So this is really exciting because I'm always standing in my kitchen and you open up whatever it is that you're looking at, a pizza box, box of macaroni and cheese, and you're wondering if the components of that packaging are recyclable or not. Do you put it in your blue bin or do you put it in your garbage bin? By 2032, the answer will be everything is recyclable. Nothing goes in the garbage when it comes to packaging. So that is really, really exciting. And then we've got the rates and dates there as a backstop, right? We don't want material to just be recyclable without actually having to prove it's getting turned into a new product. So we got the rates and dates as a backup metric to go along with that. Next slide. So when we were putting together the producer responsibility organization, we have several extended producer responsibility programs in the state dealing with things like, paint and carpet, sharps, etc. And some of those programs are more successful than others. Some of them are meeting their aims, others are not. We were able to take the information that we learned, the good practices, bad practices from all of those other programs, and learn the lessons that were necessary to create a really amazing producer responsibility organization with this bill. One of the key components is all producers will have to join one PRO. So there's not going to be 20 or 200 different PROs that make the program unmanageable. That would make it impossible for CalRecycle to oversee. There'll just be one PRO. After 8 years, once the program is all set up, producers can petition CalRecycle to create another PRO if they find it'd be helpful for glass, for example, to have their own PRO. But it was really important that we just have one from the onset. And then we wanted to make sure that the plan that the PROs developed, the budget that they came up with, that all of that was reviewed by an advisory board made up of diverse stakeholders, because so many people have been engaged in SB 54. We wanted to make sure that there was still a venue for all of those stakeholders to stay a part of the process. And then wanted to make, it was really important that CalRecycle have approval authority over all of those documents, the initial plan, the updates, the annual reports, etc. And then, of course, ensuring that the PRO covers all of the costs. So all of the regulatory costs, CalRecycle will be able to assess a fee. And then we ensure that the PRO also had to set fees on their producer organizations to ensure that all costs of local government to comply with SB 54 were fully covered. So if they need new infrastructure or whatever was going to be necessary at the local level would all be covered by producers. That was critically important. And one other really critical piece that we don't have in any of our other EPR programs. If CalRecycle finds that a plan or that the PRO is out of compliance and not doing the work they need to do to meet the requirements of the bill, they can actually take the keys away. We've seen with carpet, for example, they're not meeting their rates and dates, they're not fulfilling their commitments, and there's basically nothing CalRecycle can do short of telling companies they can't sell carpet in California. So we learned from that lesson and gave CalRecycle the authority to disband the PRO and call for the formation of another one and run the program in that interim. It was really critical. Next slide.
Tina, I want to jump in.
Yeah.
This has been incredibly insightful. We're already kind of around time, so I know there's a few other slides, so I want to make sure we highlight the most important ones. So please let me know when to stop.
Okay, so next slide. So this is the enforcement. I'll just highlight a few key things. $50,000 a day violations, because that will really ensure that no company is just paying to violate as a cost of doing business. So that was really critical. Next slide. And then here was the really exciting piece. We managed to establish a fund, the California Plastic Pollution Fund, where the producers will be paying in $500 million a year over the next 10 years to mitigate the environmental and public health impacts of plastic pollution. We would have not ever been able to get this kind of funding if it hadn't been for the ballot measure. So this was a really critical component. We've not seen that in any of the other bills. So we're really excited to see how this money can be used. We've got 60% of it directed to low income and disadvantaged communities, because obviously we know they bear the brunt of this plastic pollution. So that's super exciting. Next slide. I think that might be the last one. So this is us when we passed the bill. 29-0 in the Senate, which was super exciting and unbelievable. But it was, you know, the pictures you're seeing, you've got folks from industry and environmental community, and then the press we got from all over. We made national headlines. We were very, very proud to be called out in both, you know, CNN and the New York Times, of course, and the LA Times, who had been following this very closely. But we were very proud of the impact that this bill will have going forward. And I'm happy to take any questions if folks have them.
Thank you, Tina. I know personally I can hear about all these updates for hours, so I appreciate you trying to condense years and hours of all your hard work in like 5 minutes. So I totally appreciate that, and so happy to have you here today. I'm looking forward to more updates at future webinars. With that, I'm going to ask Tina if I saw some questions or comments happening in the chat, Tina, so if you have time to look at those, please take a look.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And I see Miho is already on camera, and so I'm very honored to introduce Miho from the Surfrider Foundation as the Plastic Pollution Manager. So Miho, off to you.
Thanks, Christy. Hi, everyone. My name is Miho Laguerre. I use she, her pronouns. Like Chris said, I'm the Plastic Pollution Manager with the Surfrider Foundation, here to provide just a really quick overview of really exciting upcoming legislation. So next slide, please. So just kind of the top three that I'd like to highlight today is the first one's the Federal Breakthrough from Plastic Pollution Act. So this is an exciting, comprehensive approach to reducing plastic pollution at the full life cycle of plastic. So it incorporates extended producer responsibility that Tina was talking about. It bans single-use plastics. It has infrastructure improvements and fiscal incentives. So everything that we've seen in California and other states pass single-use plastic reduction laws that have been successful, pieces of it are part of the Breakthrough from Plastic Pollution Act. And so it was first introduced in February of 2020. And since then it's been reintroduced last legislative session. And then we recently got confirmation that it will be reintroduced in the 118th Congress by Representative Catherine Clark of Massachusetts. But the timing's still unknown, but we're really excited to see that's going to move forward again next year. And then another piece that is really exciting is the Protecting Communities from Plastics Act. So this is also pending, hasn't been introduced yet, but it's legislation focusing on health, climate, and environmental justice. So we're really seeing that plastic, the whole life cycle of plastic impact, fence line, frontline communities, as well as our health. And so this is going to be introduced by Representative Jerry Huffman from California and Cory Booker from New Jersey. And so it has a nice bi-coastal effort. And so, yeah, that'll be coming down the pipe soon. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight the Plastic Pellet Free Waters Act. So this aims to reduce pre-production plastic pellets, also known as nurdles, those tiny little pieces of plastic. And so this one really looks to prevent the discharge of them. And so looking at the manufacturing or the transport of the pellets during the manufacturing of these plastic products from the pellets. And so making sure that those don't get into the environment. So Senator Durbin from Illinois introduced a similar bill back in 2021. But we know that this will also be introduced by Representative Mike Levin from California. And then on the next slide, there's some administrative changes that we're focusing on. And so this one's through the General Services Administration. So rather than taking the legislative route, seeing changes through federal government, through the administrative side of things. So there's a rulemaking that's focused on government procurement, so reducing the purchasing of unnecessary single-use plastic through preventing agencies to buy single-use plastic products. And so the federal government, as we all know, is a really big entity. And so being able to change the procurement processes of that, even reducing or stopping the amount of single-use plastic water bottles being purchased, can make a really big impact. And so we're really looking to the GSA to make these changes. So there's a proposed plan that's going to be released February of next year, and then the public will have 60 days to respond to any of these comments. And so we, as well as a number of other entities that are part of the coalition, will be submitting public comment. So I know we're close to time here, and so I'll stop there. And I'll leave my contact information, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and everything's also on the Surfrider website. So thank you.
Thank you, Miho. Appreciate your insight on kind of the national scale, and also representatives as well. Well, last but certainly not least, we're going to welcome back Virginia McCormick from the California Product Stewardship Council. If you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself, I see you're already there, and just providing us with some state and local updates to close us out for this portion.
Sure, can do. Thank you, Christy. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Virginia McCormick with CPSC. Next slide, please. I'll be providing a brief description on just a handful of these bills. If you'd like more details on any of these bills, I encourage you to check out the CPSC legislation matrix on our website. Starting with AB 1817, which prohibits any person from manufacturing, distributing, selling, or offering for sale any textile articles that contain regulated PFAS, and requires a manufacturer to use the least toxic alternative when removing regulated PFAS. AB 2771, beginning in 2025, this bill will prohibit any entity from manufacturing, selling, delivering, holding, or offering for sale any cosmetic product that contains intentionally added PFAS. SB 54, the Plastic Pollution Prevention and Packaging Producer Responsibility Act. Quite a mouthful. As Tina covered SB 54 earlier, I just want to make sure to echo that this robust, true EPR bill was a long time coming, and its passage is monumental not only for our water communities, but also for California as a whole. So props to them. And SB 1187 requires a pilot project in the counties of Los Angeles and Ventura to be established in partnership with garment manufacturers in order to study and report on the feasibility of recycling fabric. As some of our attendees may be aware, CPSC's Joanne Brash provided lead testimony for SB 1187. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Joanne, who is currently on maternity leave, and we're all very excited for her and her new little one. There are also 2 additional bills that are not on this list that I wanted to give special mention to. These are the 2 battery bills that were signed earlier this year, which CPSC co-sponsored in partnership with Californians Against Waste and Rethink Waste. Those are SB 1215, Covered Battery Embedded Products, and AB 2440, the Responsible Battery Recycling Act of 2022. These 2 bills are important standout pieces of legislature that we are very proud to have been part of this past session. Both bills set national precedent addressing rising occurrences of fires in the waste and recycling systems, and we expect to have a positive impact on our water communities. We're especially excited for the passage and implementation of AB 2440 as it represents the high standard of EPR regulation that we strive for here at CPSC, and we intend to utilize this bill's framework to introduce future successful EPR bills. Next slide, please. And here we have a list of state legislation that unfortunately didn't make it in 2022. Just for the purposes of time, I'm only going to address 2 of these here. That would be AB 2247, which would have required CalRecycle to contract a publicly accessible data collection interface to collect information about PFAS and products containing intentionally added PFAS. And SB 451, which would have authorized CalRecycle to establish a pilot program for the collection and recycling of beverage containers and would have redefined certain terms in order to include containers that may have otherwise been excluded. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for your time today. We're looking forward to the next OLS meeting where we expect to provide more updates on CPSC's Goal 1 and Goal 2 action items. Again, here is my contact information, so please feel free to reach out to me via email if you have any comments or questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Virginia, and be sure to send our regards to Joanne as well.
I will. Thank you.
With that, giving the interest of time, I'm going to wrap us up. I did see a few questions come into the chat during the policy discussion, so please feel free to respond to those speakers if you're still around. So looking at the coming years, there's a lot of really exciting initiatives happening. Caitlin and myself as the planning team will continue to be implementing actions throughout the next, as well as our community throughout the next 2 years, and really making sure that we have these regular opportunities for engagement. You can see like we have certainly made a dent into our timeline, but we still have 2 years left and to do this amazing work and connect and grow as an ocean litter community. So Caitlin and I are both very excited about that. We also have some last reminders. Again, calling that we're still collecting progress reports if you'd like to submit and document your involvement on the strategy or ocean litter issues at large. And then I also wanted to put a note that our next work group leads meeting will be occurring in February and March. We'll be touching base with the work group leads that spoke today and identifying dates, and be sure to send that out as soon as possible to our listserv. And then we'll also be aiming to hold one of these information sharing webinars again sometime in the June summer timeline. Again, all of this information and more can be made available on our Google group. I did add in a handful of links tied to the ocean litter strategy, so you might have to go up a little bit in the chat, but that is available there. Or please feel free to reach out to Caitlin and I. And then with that, we just wanted to do a really big thank you, first and foremost, for all of you taking the time today, especially our speakers. I know we had a huge jam-packed session. Caitlin, I see there might have been a date wrong on a slide, so I'm going to go back there and have our corrected date. And then with that, here are some of the resources we mentioned again, and then just prefacing, like, reach out to Caitlin and I anytime. We really love working with this strategy and our community, and really appreciate the time today. So with that, just wanting to thank you before we adjourn. Caitlin, anything else before we hop off today?
No, would you mind going back to the resources slide? That may be a good slide to hold for those, just for final links and helpful resources between now and our next work group meetings, and then in our next webinar in June.
Thank you. Oh, thanks, Tanya. We did learn a lot today. So with that, I know we're actually a few minutes early, so apologies to those that we may have rushed. 15 speakers is always a little a good goal to reach, but I know that always makes timing a little interesting. So thank you all for your understanding as we moved through those. And yet, thank you all for being amazing. So with that, I will close myself out